Welcome to Alternatify, the channel where we explore the mind-bending what-ifs of history. Today we plunge into a scenario that reshapes everything we know. Imagine a world without the United States of America. Picture a globe where the Declaration of Independence was never signed, or perhaps was signed and then swiftly crushed. This isn't just a map change, it's a fundamentally different reality. We're about to explore the profound consequences and global ripple effects of such a monumental failure. Join us as we delve into the good, the bad, and the downright bizarre possibilities of a world where the American Revolution never succeeded. The American Revolution is often romanticized as a David versus Goliath struggle, a ragtag group of colonists against the mightiest empire on earth. But what if those odds were even more stacked against them? What if Goliath simply proved too strong, too cunning, or too lucky? The most crucial turning point for the American cause was undoubtedly French intervention. Without the financial aid, military supplies, and especially the naval power of France, the Continental Army would have faced insurmountable odds. Imagine if France, burdened by its own internal issues or simply less convinced of American viability, had chosen to remain neutral. The lifeline of support would have been severed. Consider a more effective British strategy. What if commanders like Cornwallis had been more aggressive, employing scorched earth tactics from the outset? A relentless campaign of attrition targeting civilian infrastructure and food supplies could have broken colonial morale and resistance far sooner. The British might have learned from their early mistakes, adapting their approach to the unique challenges of fighting in the vast American wilderness. Internal divisions within the colonies were always present. A significant portion of the population remained loyal to the Crown. What if British propaganda had been more effective, exploiting these divisions to a greater extent? Imagine a scenario where loyalist militias were better organized and more numerous, actively suppressing patriot sentiment and disrupting supply lines from within. A less unified colonial front would have crumbled under pressure. Under such conditions, the Continental Army would have faced decimation. Resource starvation, coupled with superior British forces, would have led to a series of crushing defeats. Key battles like Saratoga and Yorktown, which were pivotal American victories, would have gone in favor of the British. The surrender at Yorktown, instead of being a British capitulation, might have been the final desperate stand of a defeated Continental Army. The immediate consequence would be clear. The colonies would remain part of the British Empire. While perhaps discontented, their bid for independence would have been decisively quashed. The dream of a new nation, founded on revolutionary ideals, would have been extinguished before it truly began. With the revolution crushed, the former colonies would remain firmly under British rule. This would not be a return to the status quo before the war. The Crown would undoubtedly tighten its grip. Governance would be centralized, with London dictating policy, and colonial assemblies would find their powers severely curtailed. Resentment would simmer, but open rebellion would be a distant memory. Taxation would continue, and likely increase. Britain would need to recoup the immense costs of suppressing the rebellion. These taxes would be imposed directly by Parliament, with little to no colonial representation, fueling persistent unrest. The cry of "no taxation without representation" would echo, but without the means to enforce it. Self-governance, a cherished tradition in many colonies, would be severely limited. The ultimate authority would rest with the Crown and its appointed governors, bypassing local assemblies. This would stifle local initiative and further alienate the populace from their distant rulers. The idea of popular sovereignty would be a dangerous, suppressed notion. Economically, the colonies would serve primarily as raw material providers and captive markets for British goods. Their development would be geared towards benefiting the mother country, rather than fostering independent industries. This economic exploitation would limit colonial prosperity and perpetuate a subordinate relationship. Culturally, Britain would likely attempt to promote English customs, language, and institutions. However, a unique American identity, forged through generations of colonial life and the shared experience of rebellion, would persist. It would be suppressed, perhaps, but never fully extinguished, leading to a simmering cultural tension, The societal implications would be profound. The 4th of July would be just another summer day, its significance erased from public memory. Revolutionary heroes like Washington, Jefferson, and Franklin would be remembered, if at all, as traitors and seditionists. Their names would be whispered in hushed tones, not celebrated in public squares. Slavery, a deeply entrenched institution in the southern colonies, would likely persist for much longer. The British Empire, heavily reliant on slave labor in its Caribbean sugar colonies, would have less incentive to abolish it in North America. The moral impetus for abolition, which gained momentum in the 19th century, might be significantly delayed without an independent American voice. Westward expansion would proceed, but under strict British control. The Crown would manage land grants, negotiate with Native American tribes, and establish new settlements. This would lead to a vastly different relationship with indigenous peoples, potentially less violent in some areas due to centralized control, but still driven by imperial expansion. The frontier would be a British frontier, not an American one. The absence of the United States would profoundly alter global power dynamics and international relations. The world would be a very different place without the American experiment in republicanism and democracy. The French Revolution, which drew significant inspiration from the American example, might be delayed, altered, or even prevented. Without the successful precedent of a colonial uprising against a monarchy, the intellectual and revolutionary fervor in France might have taken a different path. The ideals of liberty and self-governance would spread more slowly, if at all. The British Empire's dominance would be maintained for a much longer period. Without a powerful rival emerging in North America, Britain's global influence would be unchallenged for decades, perhaps even centuries. This would lead to a different distribution of wealth, power, and influence across the globe, with Britain at its undisputed zenith. The rise of other powers might be accelerated or altered. Without the US as a major player, nations like Canada, still a British dominion, or even Brazil, a vast independent empire, might gain greater prominence on the world stage. The geopolitical landscape would be fundamentally reconfigured, with different alliances and rivalries emerging. The spread of democracy would be significantly slower and more uneven. The American Revolution provided a powerful, tangible example of a successful democratic republic. Without this beacon, the idea of popular sovereignty and self-rule would struggle to gain traction. Monarchies and empires might persist for longer, and the 20th century's democratic wave might be a mere ripple. The lasting consequences of a failed American Revolution would cast a long shadow. Society in the former colonies would be deeply divided. The tensions between loyalists and patriots, though suppressed, would persist for generations. The rich and powerful, aligned with the crown, would maintain their dominance, while the aspirations of the common person would remain unfulfilled. The cultural landscape would be irrevocably altered. American art, literature, and music, which often drew inspiration from the nation's unique identity and revolutionary spirit, would take a different form. Perhaps a more British-centric culture would prevail, or a distinct but subdued colonial identity would emerge. The vibrant, independent cultural voice of America would be silenced. Finally, consider the impact on innovation. The United States, with its emphasis on individual liberty, free enterprise, and a spirit of ingenuity, became a global engine of scientific and technological advancement. Without this dynamic force, the world might be a slower, less dynamic place. Breakthroughs in science, technology, and industry might be delayed, altering the pace of human progress. The world we inhabit, with its democratic ideals, its global power structures, and its technological advancements, is profoundly shaped by the success of the American Revolution. To imagine its failure is to imagine a world of shadows, where the light of liberty flickered and died, leaving a very different and perhaps much darker future.